This podcast recorded live from the Urban Fly Company studio.
Yeah, it's there are deer out there.
Yeah. Big ones, different story.
Dave.
Speaking of big deer.
Yeah. You shot a big deer, a big buck, and go into how you've been archery hunting for a long time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Jay and guys. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I've been probably archery hunting since high school now.
Was that like a couple of weeks ago or
yes,
multiple years ago?
What?
High school.
Oh. 2014 I graduated.
All right.
Yep.
I feel old now.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
But yeah, when I first started out archery hunting, wasn't that good at it at first. I would just literally try to be in the woods every day that I could. And I always get like pictures of some decent bucks that I wanted to shoot. And I'm like, oh, I gotta be out there. And anytime I could, I'd literally be out there every day. And just over those years, probably up until now, for the past 5 years, I learned that being in the woods every day just isn't good, especially if you hunt small property. Like I only have 9.5 acres that I hunt, and it's in Trumbull County, in Ohio. And just being in the woods that much is just really putting pressure on the product. Like I go out there and only see a button buck, a couple yearlings, maybe a spike here and there. And I just realized going back to that much was ruining it pretty much. So in the past 5 years, I really just tried to limit the amount of hunting that I was doing back there. I would only probably go back around the first week of November, end of October, and I would take a vacation purposely every year for work then. After I started working, I would just take that week off and I would just dedicate that to hunting. Because even the way my woods is set up, only having 9.5 acres, my tree stand's kind of in the back half, but it sets up in like a pinch point in the back. And there's a couple acorn trees there, and the pinch point kind of connects my woods to
Those
the
would be
neighboring
called
woods.
oak trees.
Yeah.
The acorn tree. It's my favorite. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
There's a couple red oaks and white oaks, and there's a couple pins out there. But yeah, it pinches down right there in my woods, and it kind of runs over to the neighboring property, but it goes across the street. And there's a little section where there's no houses, so they run across the street through there, especially during the rut, just going back and forth between properties. So I've had my tree stand lived in the same spot for about 5 years now almost, and I've done pretty well out of it. But this year was literally the first time I was hunting, was October 30th on Monday. It's the first time I went out, was when my vacation started, and I don't know if you guys remember, it was raining all day, and I kept watching the weather, and I knew there was going to be a break in the weather eventually near the end, kind of around 4 o'clock. So I got in the tree stand around 3. It was still raining and everything, and eventually it started calming down. I just know once that rain stops, it's gonna get them up on their feet after it's been raining all day like that. And I didn't see anything for probably an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and then 6 Point came walking in, and he started feeding around, picking up some acorns, and then probably 5 minutes later, 3 does came in, and 6 Point turned around and saw one of the does, and they looked at each other for a minute, and the one doe took off, because it's getting close to that time. And those little yearlings came in and they were feeding, and the 6 Point was feeding after he ran that doe off. He didn't chase after her, he just kind of like took a couple steps, and she was like, I don't want it, and she just took off.
Story of my life.
Yeah. So they were feeding around in there, and then eventually they wandered and meandered their way off, because to my north there's like a thicket, and then past that thicket there's a cornfield that's been planted this year. Usually it's in soybeans, but this year they planted in corn. They usually rotate, but for the past 3 years it's been soybeans. I haven't had corn in a while. And then literally to my south, there's houses, pretty much. Like I walk the edge down towards those houses just so I don't spread scent down through the woods, so I stay as close to those houses as I can to get to my tree stand. And my tree stand sets up and I'm literally just facing the houses. So I have to stand back and like turn around and face the trunk of the tree to actually see anything coming in, but it also gives me cover in there too. But so they fed off, and then I was watching them wander down through the woods, and I don't know if deer behind me, they saw me, I didn't know there were any behind me, but I heard a blow and I was like, oh man, like that's the one noise you never want to hear, and it's already getting prime time. And
It's the worst.
I turn behind and there's 3 tails running up through the open woods, and I'm like, well, there goes my hunt for the afternoon, it's over. So they must either caught me moving up there, or maybe they caught my scent, I'm not sure. But literally 5 minutes after that, I see a doe to my north running the edge of that thicket, and behind her is what looks like a pretty nice buck. like really good. I didn't have my binoculars with me, I just had my rangefinder, because I forgot my binoculars, of course. So I pulled up my rangefinder, and I see him in there, and it's definitely a nice buck. It's like a 9-point. And I see it coming down this trail, and he stops about 60 yards away from my tree, and he's right where those deer were blowing. So I don't know if he thought that maybe there was another buck chasing him, and they kind of blew out of there because they weren't ready, but he literally stopped there for probably like 15 minutes and was just standing there. He wasn't like too alert or anything. He was looking around, swinging his head around a little bit, licking himself, would just take a couple steps, just hanging out, wasn't like popped up head, wasn't licking his nose, trying to catch scent or anything like that, but he was just wondering like, what blew these does out of here? Was there another buck in here trying to mess with my does? And then...
And are you shitting your pants at this point?
Oh yeah. At this point he's 60 yards and I got my rangefinder on him. I'm like, oh, that's definitely a nice buck. This is gonna be like the biggest buck if I get to him or not. And it literally feels like forever goes by, but it was definitely at least 15 minutes probably he was standing there.
And we've all had bucks at 60 yards that
Yeah.
stay at 60 yards.
Exactly. I got my bow with me. I'm like, I'm not making that shot if he's out there. I'm like a 20, 30 yard guy. Even 40, you're pushing it for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's literally standing there this whole time, and finally he just breaks and he starts coming, angling in towards my tree, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna come in. And I'm hunting a big maple tree, and it's right in front of me, so he can't see me. So I turn around and I grab my bow, and that's when my heart really starts pounding out of my chest. I'm like, oh man, he's coming in. It's gonna happen right here. And he's kind of quartering to me a little bit. And he gets down, starts feeding on some acorns. That's when I go to draw back, and I draw back, and he looks right up at me as I draw. But I'm already drawing on him, and he kind of does that like side stagger step to like, look at me to see if I'm like what's going on up there. And so he's quartering to me even more now. So I just drop the pin right down on him. I'm trying to settle him, trying to keep it steady, making sure I have it on there good, and I let it off. And it smacks him, I can hear it hit real hard. I'm like, oh man, I definitely hit that front shoulder bad. And I got lighted knocks now too. I see sticking out of him pretty good. And he takes off, makes a huge jump, runs into a thicket, gets into the thicket. He literally runs up the thicket, then down the thicket, and then back up the thicket. So I'm thinking like he's gotta be hurt pretty bad. He doesn't
Yeah, he didn't know what's going on.
Yeah, he's not beelining it out of there, taking one route. Like he's kind of confused, just panicking. Then runs back up the thicket and kind of disappears into more thick stuff, and I can't really see. The only reason I could see him in the thicket was literally my lighted knock, kind of was just like flapping around through there. And then he took up, and I didn't see any of them anymore. And I didn't know if he was down or if he just kept running. I didn't know if I got good penetration with my arrow. There were just so many things going through my head. Like I couldn't even be happy at the moment. I was like, oh man, I think I just ruined like the biggest deer in my life right there.
And you got to sit there for an hour.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
that's the worst hour ever.
So I'm in the stand like contemplating like, well, maybe I'll just get down, go see if I see blood where I hit him. He was at about 23 yards when I shot him. So I was like, maybe I'll just go get down, see if I see blood where I hit him. I didn't even go look. I literally just went back up to the house because my fiance was at our new house that we just bought. And
Congrats.
Thank you. We were finishing the floors over there, and she was like sanding stuff down for the final coat of poly we were putting on. And so I come back up to the house, and she's like, did you see anything? I'm like, yep. I'm just like deflated at that moment. Like I feel like it just ruined like the opportunity of a lifetime. And she's like, well, what happened? And I like told her the story about the deer and everything. And I was like, I think I'm gonna wait at least a couple hours before I even go back and look. And so we literally went to the house, finished the floors on the house and everything. Came back, brought her with me. She's never even came with me before to go tracking, so it was kind of cool just to bring her.
Yeah, that's real cool.
So it's like 9 o'clock now. I waited about 3 hours almost, probably from the time that I shot him. And we go back there, I go to the spot, don't see any blood where I shot him. I'm like, oh man, because it didn't go in and out, it just hit him, so it's gonna take a while for him to bleed. So I track it over to that thicket, probably 20 yards away. Don't really see anything yet, and then finally I get a little bit more into that thicket, and I pick up my first good drop of blood. And I could see it up with my flashlight. I'm like, oh, that looks like a decent trail. I mean, the leaves were still wet, and it looked like artery to me because it was still real bright red, but you can't tell sometimes when it's wet like that.
Right.
I couldn't tell if there was a couple bubbles in it or not, but it looked like it. So we followed the trail up and down, and I would just leave her at the last spot that I would find blood. I'm like, you just stay here. I'm going to look up a little bit further because it was thick. It was hard to get through. And then if I'd find a good trail, I'd be like, all right, you can come to me and move to me now. And then we just kept moving forward. We get to a spot where it kind of opens up a little bit, and then it gets thicker. And I'm debating now, like, if I should keep going, because the blood's starting to get a little bit more spotty. I'm like, man, I don't know if I should keep going right here. And I turn around, I talk to her, I'm like, I think we'll come back in the morning. Like, I don't want to keep looking. I'm trying to shut my lights off, trying to see if I can see my lighted knock sticking up somewhere. And she's like, well, why don't you just go like a little bit forward through that kind of little clear area to the edge and see where he ran into that thicker stuff on the edge. So I'm like, all right, I'll go up there. I'm just going to go by myself. I shut all my lights off except for my headlamp, and I just kept it on the lowest setting that I could just in case he was bedded somewhere in there and I don't want to jump him. So I just creep forward as slow as I can, follow in the trail, get to the edge of the thicket, get to the edge of the clear where it goes into the thicket, and I start looking over and I don't see anything. I tell her she can move forward and come up with me. And then I turn my light on, and like 5 feet in front of me, I just see a tan and then white belly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no way that was him. And I look up and I see his antlers sticking up, and we were just freaking out at that moment. We went over and grabbed him, and like I was jumping up and down. I told her, I was like, I'm so excited right now, I feel like I'm gonna throw up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was an amazing time.
So what size was it?
It was a 9 point. Yeah, it
9
was
point.
probably like,
Did you tape it?
I didn't tape it yet, no. But it's probably like maybe 140s.
Nice.
Yeah. It's
Nice.
definitely my biggest buck to date.
That's awesome.
Yep.
It's definitely not a small deer either. That was
Yeah.
a good sized deer. When you sent me the picture, I was like, damn, that's a big deer.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at SVS Fishing. And please subscribe to our podcast, the SVS Fly Fishing Podcast, on your favorite podcast app.